Welcome to Earthstock. Earthstock is a week-long series of programming that focuses on sustainability and the environment. It started off more than 10 years ago in a slightly different form as a small little table inside this building, and they called it Spring Fest, and it was the environmental club that kind of got things up and running. And they did that way for 2 years. And after those 2 years, the president of the university at the time, Dr. Shirley Kenny, really invested in this initiative, and it became a presidential initiative from the university. She put a lot of money and resources behind it at that time. Our very distinguished service professor, Dr. Malcolm Bowen, became academic co-chair, along with George Meyer, who was in the president's office as well, to help get this thing going and what it is. And it took it from a small table to a really big campus-wide festival on one day. We've since grown it from then to just be a Friday festival to be a week-long series of programming because we have so much expertise, knowledge, and insight here from our faculty, our staff, and indeed our students. And we want to showcase all that they know, all that they do, and how they serve. And so it's now grown into a 5-day, week-long program of 22 programs. About 15 of them happen tomorrow. So tomorrow's kind of a big day. If you're around, make sure you walk through the academic mall. You will not be able to miss Earthstock happening. Music on 2 stages, dance performances, rubber duck races down Stony Brook. You see they're filling the water in the brook right now. So it's a really lively, one of the biggest campus-wide events that we have here at Stony Brook as well. Today we have the very fine Mr. Tom Wilson from the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, who's going to lead us here in a discussion of science at sea and life aboard an oceanographic research vessel. I'm sure he's going to talk to you a great deal about the Seawolf, which is docked out in Port Jefferson Harbor. Oh, I see some familiar faces coming down the track. So let me tell you a little bit about Tom. Tom has a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry from the College of William and Mary, and a master's degree from right here at Stony Brook University in Marine Environmental Sciences. Since 1983, he's served as the engineer and manager of the Instrument Laboratory in the School of Marine Sciences, Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. Tom's design credits include over 50 major items of scientific and oceanographic equipment. He is a founding member of the Research Vessel Technical Enhancement Committee of UNOVS, which is the coordinating organization of the U.S. academic research vessel fleet. And he's provided technical support to over 200 research projects at numerous institutions in the U.S. and abroad, including sea time on 11 major research cruises in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean. And he's a good colleague and friend of the university, and we're lucky to have Tom here at Stony Brook. And so will you join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Wilson?
Thanks an awful lot, Dean, and to the Earthstock Committee, and to Dave Ullman at the Wang Center, and my many colleagues and friends that you will see pictures of and hear stories about the next hour. Hopefully they'll all want to talk to me tomorrow. And thanks to you all particularly for coming. A little bit about how I got where I am, because after all I am an engineer and I got my degree in marine sciences. About the end of my career here as a graduate student, getting my master's degree at the Marine Sciences Research Center, which is now the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, the person who ran the engineering laboratory left for a job at the National Bureau of Standards. And he was an engineer who had learned his oceanography on the street. People were desperate. They couldn't find somebody because it was the early 1980s, and anybody who had an engineering degree could go work at a Long Island defense contractor for what the director was making at Marine Sciences. So I started taking equipment home and fixing it in my spare bedroom because I'm from a family full of engineers, left, right, and center. It was kind of like Darth Vader and Star Wars telling Luke, you cannot escape your destiny. So I did, in fact, make a slight turn and became an oceanographer who learned his engineering on the street. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 30 years. And I tell people, if I won the lottery, I wouldn't quit doing what I'm doing, but I would make a trip to the Apple Store. Anyway, Anyway, let's talk about, we're here to talk about the work I do at SoMAS and about what research vessels are like. And by all means, don't feel, wave your arms. We'll have time for questions at the end and to handle all these cool things. And don't be afraid to, raise your hands and ask questions, except for Malcolm, who knows much more about a lot of this stuff than I do. So hopefully I won't make too many mistakes. Research vessels are ocean-going laboratories where we go out to sea. This is one of my favorite boats, the Seward Johnson, owned by Harbor Branch Oceanographic. And you can see in the stern, it's got a fancy A-frame. Oceanographic vessels look different from almost any other kind of ship. They almost always have a gantry or a crane out the back where you handle equipment over the end. Often they'll have a gantry over the side. We'll see that in other pictures. But that just happens to be a really nice picture of one of my favorite boats. Research vessels work all over the world. Those green dots are places where I have either gone or sent equipment. Some very nice places like Barbados and the Mediterranean. Some not so nice places like Iceland and Antarctica. Some really cool places like the Western Pacific that unfortunately my equipment went, but I didn't get to go to. Research vessels come in different sizes. This happens to be pretty much one of the largest boats out there. This is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy. It's a 420-foot research icebreaker. And you can see actually here's that side crane I was talking about, as well as the rear frame and helicopter deck. That's a great boat. Then more in the regular type of boats you would see, this is a global class boat, close to 300 feet. This is the Nor. It's owned by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Would have 20 or so crew, up to 38 scientists, worldwide operations. Typically a boat like this will cruise around the world, be gone for many months, and the crew will rotate on and off on perhaps a few months basis. We'll spend 2 or 3 months at sea and rotate off. And the scientists will go on for anywhere from a week to a month, depending on what work they're doing. And typically there'd be several teams of scientists. So say this boat would go into the Western Pacific and you'd have a team of geologists and a team of physical oceanographers and a team of biologists that would all be working perhaps on with some coordination, but very often just simply working on different projects, and they happen to be in the same place because operating these boats is expensive. Now, you drop down a class. This is the Endeavour. This is the research vessel owned by University of Rhode Island. It's about 185 feet, 11 crew, up to 30 scientists, although I can tell you 30 scientists on the Endeavour, you'll be hot bunking, which means that you get bunk time, you share bunk time with somebody else. So like they're working at night, you're working during the day, so the term hot bunking comes from, the sheets might still be warm when you get into your bunk. This boat's still capable of worldwide operations. You can see there's still that rear A-frame. And up here, this is something else you'll see very often on research vessels. You'll see what's called a net mast at the front. And that would be to take uncontaminated meteorological samples, air sampling, things like that. Here's the Pelican. This is a regional class boat, 100 feet, 8 crew, 6 crew, 14 scientists, regional operations. I like this picture of the Pelican here because this is down, the Pelican is home based at a place called Cocodrie, Louisiana. And Cocodrie is so far out in the Mississippi Delta that there was no highway to it until 1956. And even now, it's so flat and it's so low that when there is a storm, you have to drive about 50 miles to get to high ground. And that interesting, unfortunately, there's only a corner. This is the corner of the Lumcon building. And you'll notice that's the floor, the first floor, because the entire laboratory is raised up on pylons about 12, 14 feet off the ground. so that when it floods, because it floods that often, when it floods, the lab stays dry. And in fact, not for the Pelican, but for smaller boats, it's kind of fun because you can pull a small boat under the lab into one of the slips and they open up a hatch in the floor and you can actually pick stuff straight up out of the boat, equipment straight out of the boat up into your lab. And then, of course, my favorite boat of all time, the research vessel Seawolf, home ported down here in Port Jefferson, owned by Stony Brook University. It's 80 feet long, 2 crew, up to 10 scientists, local operations, but local's a relative word. The Seawolf was a conversion from an offshore fishing boat, and she has gone out to the edge of the continental shelf. She is one of the finest, I think really the finest vessel of her size. I know of no finer vessel of her size anywhere in the world in terms of her capabilities, in terms of her abilities to work at sea. So here we are up the Hudson River. Now, research vessels come in other shapes than what you are normally used to seeing. This is the Kilo Moana, operated by the University of Hawaii, 186 feet long and 88 feet wide, kind of a strange thing, and you can see there's a lot of water underneath this boat, and the reason is that it's a swath ship, which stands for Small Waterplane Area Twin Hull Ship. And the major amount of flotation is in these pontoons under the boat. And then at the waterline, the area of the boat gets very narrow, and then gets wide again in the platform. So what's the point? The point is that when a wave goes by, even a wave doesn't pick the whole ship up. The moment that the amount of buoyancy change when a wave goes by is very small. So the ship is very, very stable. And in fact, the Kilo Moana is fully operational in sea state 6, which is 4 to 6 meters wave height, 18, 20 feet. And her response in that kind of sea is 3 degrees pitch, 5 degrees roll, and basically that's like a cruise liner, better than a cruise liner. You know, this is the ship, if you get seasick, and I get seasick, this is the ship to be on. So here's launch day in 2001, and you can see, take a look, you can see the big pontoons underneath. And you can always tell if it's launch day because there's a whole bunch of people in suits and dress uniforms, and that doesn't usually happen when you're at sea. And then here's the day before the launch day, and you can get another view of those pontoons and how they work. And here is Trevor Young, a good friend of mine, a 2010 Stony Brook University Environmental Studies graduate, who, after working for me for a year or so, became an instrument technician at the University of Hawaii Ocean Technology Group, and he works on the Kilo Moana and their other research vessels. And this is him at the rail of the Kilo, and I get great stories from him, get great emails from him, and then occasionally I get pictures from him, which makes me wonder why I didn't apply for that job. So, here's another vessel, the research platform Flip, and then notice I say research platform because, strictly speaking, this is not a research vessel because it doesn't have its own motors. It has to be towed to place. It's owned by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. It's 355 feet long, and it's shaped very much, in fact, the design was inspired by a Louisiana Slugger baseball bat. You see the baseball bat shape here. And the idea is that the Flip is for situations such as air-sea research where you need even more stability than something that a swath ship can give you. And it gets towed to sea horizontally, and then by flooding ballast tanks, it flips to a vertical position, at which point it's an incredibly stable platform, moves inches in 30-foot seas, and can be used for all kinds of studies that require that kind of stability. So here's Flip being towed along by a Navy boat out to its location. And then as they flood the ballast tanks, it flips from horizontal to vertical. If you go on YouTube, you can find some videos of this that are pretty neat. And then once it's there, it opens up and unfolds all of these masts and stuff to do air-sea interaction work. Now, one of the cool things about being on Flip, and I had been on her, not when she was operating, but at dockside, is that she has to be fully operational and the crew has to be able to live on board her when she's in either either orientation. And so this leads to some M.C. Escher-like rooms where things are hooked in two directions. The galley is one exception. The galley is actually on what are called trunnions. The whole galley is on a big pivot, and when the ship flips, they pull the locking pins on the pivot, and as it pivots, the entire galley, the ovens, the coffee, the range, the stove, pivots from horizontal to vertical, and it's so smooth that they can leave a pot of coffee on the stove and it won't spill. The transition is so smooth. All right, cruise number one, Barbados. Cue the tropical paradise. And this really is a tropical paradise. This is not a postcard. This is a snapshot taken by somebody on one of the cruises I've been on. Here's the science party. Here's me 50 pounds ago and 20 years. And various other folks who were from Marine Sciences Research Center, now SoMAS. One of the cool things about working at SoMAS is very much one of the cool things about working at Stony University is that you do come into contact with people from around the world. We've got folks here from England. We have people from New Zealand. Kamazima Louisa here, who you will see later, hails from Tanzania. I think we have an international dinner. We have people at SoMAS from more than 15 countries. It's usually between 15 and 20 different countries. And we have a potluck dinner every year for invited graduate students where everybody brings their regional specialties. That's a really fun event to go to. So, one of the things about research vessels is that nobody knows what to do with you because we're so different. We're not really passenger ships, we're not cruise liners, we're not freighters. So when we pull into port, nobody knows what to do with us. So they always stick us in the far corner of the port with the other weirdos. And you get these very interesting neighbors. Now this one, I remember being in Barbados, we had this vessel next to us like this. And supposedly, it was the royal family of Britain, or some members of the royal family of Britain visiting Barbados. And I have to admit, walking past at night was an experience because you basically had these uniformed sailors standing at parade rest in front of every coil of rope just in case it might flip into the water. And then you look through the curtains into the salon, and it's like that last scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There are these impossibly tall, impossibly pale, impossibly thin humanoids moving in slow motion. It's just like they're different from us. But it was cool. It was cool to have neighbors like that. So here we are. Yeah, we get this. And this is where we are. This was on the Seward Johnson. So we're deploying an instrument mooring. Typically, something would go into the water for a year or more. We'd come back and get it in a year. You have various types of recording instruments, all on a line that might be hundreds or thousands of feet long. And it has floats, in some cases deep sea floats, in some cases shallower floats. And then what you do is you move slowly towards where you want this thing to go, and you let the top of the mooring out, so you sort of string it out as the boat moves along, so you get this long tail. And at the end of the tail, which is the bottom, what's going to be the bottom of the mooring, you have a bunch of railroad wheels. And when you get to the spot that you want the mooring to be, you pull the cord, the railroad wheels drop, and they drag everything down. And if you did it right, it's perfectly vertical, and everything's at the right depth that you were interested in. Then when you come back a year later, at the bottom of this whole thing is a device called an acoustic release. And the acoustic release basically holds on to the weight. And you come back and you ping it with an acoustic signal that says, "Hi, we're back." And it'll, if it's working, and hopefully they do, it will ping back and says, "Yeah, I'm here." And it says, "Okay, let go." And it lets go. And yes, we donate the railroad wheels permanently to King Neptune, but we get them for scrap value from the Long Island Railroad. They sell us their old ones that have worn out of spec, so we get them for basically what they would get for them at the scrap yards. It's a pretty good deal. People around the world use railroad wheels as weights. And so hopefully it comes up. Very often, you'll put 2, since the consequence of having your acoustic release not work is you don't get your instruments back. You very often will put 2 side by side, and you'll have them hold each end of a little bridle. And if either one of them works, the bridle slips through a ring and the thing comes back. Occasionally, we have had one. We had one in Antarctica that got that the release wouldn't go, and we went back the following. We actually could see it on the side scan sonar, but you couldn't get down to it. So we went back with what one of my technicians, David Lusick, calls the claws of death. And the claws of death is 100 feet of chain with these hooks welded on it. And you let it down on the end of a wire, and you circle the location of your mooring, and you snag it with this down a couple of 100 feet. And sure enough, we grabbed it, got back on deck. All right, here's a glass float. And in fact, there's a glass float here. This is my first of our exhibits. You would not think it to be true, but glass actually makes a very good housing, or has very good pressure resistance if you build it in a nice globe, a nice spherical shape like this. And this is basically, here's half of one, here's half of a sphere. As you can see, it's like 3/8, half an inch thick, made of this particular kind of glass with a ground glass seal, just like you see in chemistry class. And you put 2 halves of it together, and you strap them with hose clamps just so they don't come loose immediately. And they will hold up under a lot of pressure. This one happens to have a strobe light in it. And it's tested to, and you can see it when you come down here later, tested to 15,000 pounds per square inch. Now that's the equivalent of 30,000 feet of immersion. The rule of thumb is every 2 feet you go down in the ocean, you get 1 more pound per square inch. So 10 meters, 30 feet is 1 atmosphere. So at 30 feet down, you're twice the surface pressure. At 60 feet down, you're at 3 times the surface pressure, and so on. So this is proof to 15,000 or 30,000 feet, which is essentially anywhere in the ocean, nearly anywhere in the ocean. Okay, this is what happens when you don't protect against pressure. This is a classic Oceanographer's Trophy. Is you take a foam cup and you take magic markers and you decorate the foam cup, usually with something like Barbados 1996. You put it in a net bag and you put it on a piece of equipment that you're setting down. And when you go down to, say, 2,000 meters, 6,000 feet, 3,000 pounds per square inch, the individual air chambers crush down to nothing, and the cup shrinks down to your little trophy. And you'll see people, it's kind of like merit badges, you'll go into some oceanographers' offices and they'll have 20 of these because they'll do one for every cruise that they do, every deep sea cruise that they do. Now some people, a cup is not good enough. This is someone who did wig stands, so that this is the original wig stand. As you can see, at different pressures, you get different varieties of shrunken heads. Okay, back to Barbados. This is the story of the little lost boat. We were, for this particular cruise, we were looking at the recruitment of coral reef fish larvae back onto the reef. So you have coral reefs all along the west coast of Barbados here, and you have the reef fish spawn, and the fish have a planktonic life stage, but a reef is a great big mouth. So if you're a baby microscopic fish and you hang around the reef, you're going to get eaten. Coral's going to eat you, or something's going to filter you. So the way to survive is to sort of go offshore. But how does a tiny little planktonic fish come back to the reef? So our hypothesis was that there were big eddies here, and the fish would circulate around in the eddies, and when they got to the life stage where they were ready to drop down and start life on the reef, they would wait till they were inshore and then drop down. So in order to do this, we had to characterize, and this was one where we were working, where we had biologists sampling, and we had physicists taking physical numbers, temperature and salinity, and current, speed, and direction. We were taking biological samples, and we were trying to show whether this was actually possible. So we would go back and forth. And it was 3 days. We did 1 day of physics, we did 1 day of biology, and we did 1 day of something else, I forget, water sampling or something like that. But anyway, so we'd go back and forth doing doing a day of sampling, and then back and forth over the same area. This is about 10 or 12 miles. So the Little Lost Boat, we were in port, and I went up to Hole Town, so named because there's a tiny little harbor there, the Hole. Went up to Hole Town, and I was in talking to somebody, and they're really, Barbados is a great place to go. You should go if you want to go to the Caribbean. Very nice place. And I was talking to the lady at the store, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing in Barbados?" And I said, "Well, we're this research vessel, and you may have seen us. We're this 200-foot white boat going up and down the coast." He says, she says, "You are the Little Lost Boat." I said, "We are?" He says, "Yes, this is wonderful. My son is 7 years old, and he has been watching you all week long. And he is very concerned. He says, 'Mama, the white boat, it cannot find the harbor. I see him going up, and I see him going down, I see him going up, and I see him going down.'" So he was the lost boat. So I was able to tell her that she could assure her son that we could find the harbor at Bridgetown whenever we wanted to. We were not, in fact, lost. So here we are taking, setting up the release bars on a Loch Ness multiple plankton net array. You may have heard of a plankton net, which is a fine mesh net you draw through the water, and you take water samples, and that filters out, depending on the mesh size, either zooplankton or larval fish or phytoplankton, smaller plankton. But it's a little bit crude if you need to take a sample at a specific depth or in specific water conditions. The plankton net basically takes samples from the time you drop it in the water till the time you bring it out. So the Loch Ness is a fancy computerized plankton net. It's got a whole bunch of sensors up here. It can tell how deep it is. It can tell the salinity of the water. It can tell how much fluorescence, how much chlorophyll there is. It can tell, it has a velocity meter, so it can tell how much water it's been pulled through. So, and then it has a whole bunch of these nets that are on bars. And the idea is you send the thing down with all the bars closed. Then you push a button at the surface when you get to where you want, and the first bar drops down. And between the first and the second bars is net number 1. So you can drop down and fly the thing. It's kind of like a kite in reverse. You fly it at a depth, whatever depth you want, and you take you can filter a certain amount of water. Then you push the second button, the top bar, the second bar drops, so the first net closes and the second net opens, and you can do like 5 or 6 samples. So in one tow, you can get 5 or 6 samples that are specific to a certain depth or certain range of depths, and also specific to a certain, and you know the water characteristics of where you've taken your numbers. So here's a lot of fun. There's a couple of my friends. This is Teresa Rotuno underneath, pushing up on the net bars to set the net, and she's laughing because you see there's water dripping down. The net is wet from the last pass, so there's water and maybe a little plankton, a few larval fish dribbling down on her. Over here is Lorraine Heilman, another PhD student, and she's not getting dripped on, but she is pinching her fingers, pushing the net bars up. You got to make sure that you don't get your fingers caught. So setting the thing up for another, and of course, getting something like this on and off the boat, if it's moving at all, has a certain thrill to it too, because it's on the end of a rope, the boat's doing this, it's doing this, it weighs 400 pounds, and you're kind of like, it's kind of like the World Oceanographic Wrestling Federation. Anyway, here's Teresa in a somewhat quieter mood, with a big smile on her face. She's actually flying the Loch Ness, because she's getting data back here on the computer in real time, telling her how fast the ship is going, how deep the Loch Ness is, how much line is out, and then she's on, you see she's got a headset on, she's on the headset to the bridge, to the winch operator, saying, okay, we need to go a little quicker, a little faster. The winch operator's talking to the bridge. So let's run a little faster, let's run a little slower, let's pull in a little bit of line, let's let out a little bit of line in order to fly the Loch Ness at desired depth. And I'm really glad we got this picture, because there are uncharted seamounts around Barbados. We actually charted several new seamounts during our trips. And a couple of days after this happy face, one of those seamounts, Teresa was on the Loch Ness, and one of the seamounts appeared. And now the Loch Ness is a couple of 100 yards behind the boat, but the water went from several thousand meters deep to several hundred meters deep like that. And of course, she hollers to the winch operator, pull it in, pull it in, pull it in. But you know, it's a ship, you can't turn that quick, you can't pull in that quick. And basically, we flew the Loch Ness into the side of the seamount like a bug on a windshield and snapped the wire. And there's $80,000 worth of equipment on the ocean floor. And life is like that. I mean, if you're out there, it's like sending your kids to hunt tigers in the jungle. You know, sometimes they come back with the tiger, but occasionally there's just a lot of roaring and screaming. Luckily, our ship captain heard the roaring and screaming from the laboratory and deduced that something was awry. So he hit the record GPS position on the ship's navigation system, and the Seward Johnson, among other things, has ROV operations. We did not have an ROV aboard, a remotely operated vehicle aboard, but the boat was back in Barbados about 8 months later with an ROV, which they had thoughtfully put on the boat the next time it was in Florida, and they went down to that location, to that GPS location, and they scouted around for about 20 minutes, and they found the Loch Ness beautifully, perfectly, lying pristine against the side of the cliff, and they picked it up, put a line on it, got it back on deck, and with a few $1,000s worth of parts, it was back in service. So we did get the Loch Ness back. All right, it's too bad Professor Bowen has left. This is Professor Bowman's son Hamish, who is now a oceanographic researcher in New Zealand. But we're setting up GPS drifting buoys, and I have to put this picture in because this is one of the pieces of equipment I've designed through the years. Basically, it's a weather balloon in the ocean. It has a GPS antenna and a GPS receiver and a satellite transmitter, and will, on a regular basis, we'll figure out its position and then record it and transmit it through the same satellite system that you see track turtles and things like that. You could send a certain amount of data through. So we were using those to track the currents at different depths. Okay, so here we go. Where you could put sails on these things and track the surface current, or you can do what we were doing here, which is a big mesh sock, vertical mesh sock, and would track the currents at different depths. So here we go, got it, put it in, and this is a great picture. Now Bob bought these, okay? Bob paid for it. Bob Cowan, who's now actually went from SoMAS to the University of Miami, and now he is the director of the Hatfield Marine Science Center at Oregon State University. But here is Bob. I'm glad I wasn't there for this. I mean, if they're his, he can do what he wants with them. But I remember showing him, please, when you put it in the water, just gently slip it in. Be nice, be gentle. And then I get this picture of flinging, and that's about 9 feet to the water, I mean, it worked, it still worked, but you know, be nice. Be nice to the gear. It's hard enough to keep it running. So here I am in my workshop at sea. After 24 hours, it's just as messy as my workshop on the land. We'll move past that. Okay, sea creatures number one. Oceanographers do not, in general, do a lot of scuba diving. When you dive, you need to be in excellent shape, such as Dr. Cowan here, and here's Kamazima, by the way. You need to be in good physical condition. There are extreme limits on how deep you can dive and how long you can go under for, and frankly, there are a lot of places where we do research, Antarctica or New York Harbor, where you're not so sure you want to be in swimming. Anyway, but anyway, here is the exception. Here's Bob Cowan about to dive, looking at the top of a current meter mooring we had just deployed. Sea creatures number two. Yes, this is the obligatory dolphin shot. No matter how long you have been an oceanographer, no matter how many times it has happened, no matter where you are, what you're doing, if they come on the ship intercom and say, dolphins off the bow, there's a huge crash as everyone drops what they're doing and rushes to the front, to the bow of the ship with a camera in order to get pictures like this. And this really is just as cool as you would imagine it to be. And this is something dolphins do on their own, and they learn to do it. They surf on the pressure wave in front of the ship. And when the first time you see it, you say, oh, they're going to die. They're going to die. They're going to get hit. They're going to get crushed. They're going to get run over. They're going to get chopped up in the props. Not a chance. As much chance of a dolphin getting hit by a ship as a kitten being run over by a turtle. It just isn't going to happen. They are so graceful. They are so capable. They're so fast and so agile in the water. And they just sit there, you know, back and forth, 10, 15 minutes, and they get bored and go off to do whatever else they do. But it is very cool. Now, sea creatures number 3. This guy, this is one of some of those colorful people I said in the advertisement I was going to introduce you to. This guy's name is Jay. Jay was the cook on the Seward Johnson. He had, in a former career, been a chef at some rather 3-star restaurants in the Caribbean. So dinner with Jay was always an experience. I mean, you sit down in a ship's mess hall and you get goat cheese appetizers. They were good. The other thing that Jay was a fisherman. I think this was part of the reason he took the job on the research vessel. Every time we slow down to take a sample, he'd throw a fishing line over the stern if we weren't working off the stern. And we didn't mind because occasionally he would come up with this. This is a wahoo. It's one of the fastest fish in the ocean. It eats flying fish for a living, which kind of gives you an idea about how fast he is. And he was just wonderful. We broke out the grill, and he was grilled on the rear deck. After scientific examination, he was grilled on the rear deck and served with steaks that night. And here are the flying fish. This is the Barbados, the Bajan. The Barbados dollar has the flying fish on the back. And this is a flying fish flying. They actually do avoid predators by swimming very quickly, and then they leap above the water and spread their pectoral fins, which are very large, and they glide for long distances, hundreds of yards in some cases, to escape predators. And it's pretty funny because they really didn't evolve in a place and time where there were ships. So you'll be working on the back deck at night, they can't see you. And all of a sudden, you'll be sitting there and something will come in over the rail and boom, against the bulkhead and land on the deck. Now, by tradition, those flying fish belong to the captain, if he finds out. Otherwise, right down to the galley. Hopefully, you aren't in the way, because they are big enough. They're about like this big. So they're big enough to hurt. They hit you at 15 or 20 miles an hour. And a flying fish is excellent. There's a flying fish sandwich. The tradition is, if you eat flying fish when you're in Barbados, you will always go back. And I don't know if it's true, but I can tell you that the last time I was in Barbados, I was too busy, didn't get my flying fish sandwich, and I have not been back in many years, so maybe it is a mistake. Over here, I will note for any of you who do take my advice to go to Barbados, see this yellow stuff? There is a yellow pepper sauce that is served in Barbados on the restaurant tables, right next to the ketchup. And it looks so innocuous, it almost looks like mustard. It is made from habanero peppers. It is the hottest stuff you will ever eat in your life. If you go to Pepperheads in Port Jefferson, they sell it, a Lottie's Bajan pepper sauce. And I think it needs a warning label on the can, on the container, because you literally, I have seen tourist after tourist will just ladle a spoonful of this stuff, plop it on whatever they're eating, and they take one bite, and it's like, call the paramedics. All right. One last thing about food. Food on a research vessel is important. This is a picture another one of those pictures that Trevor Young sent me from the Kilo Moana to torment me. King crab. I guess they didn't have a wahoo that day, so they just had to have steak and king crab. And then the final sea creature is the crew members, who are great people. And I just wanted to show you this picture of this able-bodied seaman because I wanted to show you that hamburger and show that some great engineering projects really are edible. So, all right, cruise number 2. I'm going to have to speed up because I got a lot of slides to get through. Cruise number 2, Antarctica. Nobody's swimming except this guy, guaranteed. So here's another mooring deployment. We're putting it in. We're in the Ross Sea, and we are going to put in the deployment of sediment traps. These are actually looking at sediment that's coming off of glaciers. And you would put this whole string in, and the ice actually forms over it. It takes 1 year, and you come back a year later. This was the cruise that we had to use the hooks of death, the claws of death. So here we are, more railroad wheels. Note 1,400 painted on the railroad wheels, so the two 700-pound railroad wheels. Also notice that there are no hard hats being used. This is a number of years ago. Now they make you wear hard hats, although frankly, if a 1,400-pound railroad wheel falls on your hard hat, it's really not going to make it matter. So here, sometimes the weather is lovely, sometimes it's not. You know, and sometimes you really want to make sure you don't run out of Dramamine. Myself, the problem, of course, with Dramamine is that you can't keep it. Sometimes you can't keep it down long enough. I used to use the scopolamine patches, which are really nice because no matter how sick you get, you can't throw up something that's stuck on behind your left ear. Cruise number 3, Barcelona, Spain. Wonderful place. Another place I suggest that you go. With a playful nature. This is a local artist, cartoonist, underground cartoonist named Mariscal. This is the port. This is his shrimp. So that's the kind of that atmosphere there is, and it is a fun place. So here we are. This is the Oceanographic Garcia del Cid. This is owned by the Barcelona Institute of Marine Sciences, and I had a chance to be on her a few times. And she's a lovely little boat, you know, in the intermediate range, 150, 180 feet. But then you get more interesting neighbors, and this is I'm telling you this story to tell you this story. So we're in the port of Palma, which is Majorca is one of the large islands in the Western Mediterranean. We're in the port of Palma, and again, they have us stuck in the far corner of the port because they don't know what to do with us. And we notice a bunch of guys putting white plastic on the dock bumpers of the pier next to us. And we figured, is it Cristo in town? You know, that environmental artist that wraps everything in white plastic? No, it was after they covered the dock bumpers, this shows up. This is a 37-foot yacht, the El Said, the personal yacht of the Sultan of Oman, one of the world's 10 richest people. Now, not only did he have the 337-foot yacht, which, by the way, the white sheets were to prevent the dirty dock bumpers getting his boat dirty, he had a 450-foot freighter following him with all the stuff that this 337-foot yacht couldn't hold, including 2 Bell attack helicopters with rockets mounted on them, in case, I guess, the Sultan encountered any Somali pirates or aquatic panhandlers. So I looked at it and I said, you know, we just have to do something. And I wanted to put a bed sheet, a spray painted bed sheet with a big sign that says, hey, Sultan, we have more antennas than you, in hope that they would invite us over for tea or something, but cooler heads prevailed. Now, if you feel bad about the Sultan having to pay for 2 boats, it so happens that recently he sold the El Said and he had a new one built, which is 508 feet long. Presumably, this holds everything he could possibly need. The former vessel is now renamed the Lolo Al Bahr and is available in the Mediterranean for private charter. So if you all want to have a really good spring break, and you have 250,000 euros, which I don't know what the exchange rate is, but $300,000. If you have $300,000 for a week, you and about 115 of your friends can have a really good time on the Sultan's former yacht. All right, cruise number 4, Long Island Sound. How to turn a perfectly good passenger ferry into a research vessel. Now this, you guys may recognize, the P.T. Barnum, one of the 3 boats that cross Long Island Sound. And this is something, as an example, of something that's increasingly happening around the world in that we are putting automated systems on board commercial vessels in order to gain more, have more platforms out there. Because all those boats you saw cost lots of money. The Seawolf, at only an 80-foot boat, cost $3,000 or $4,000 a day to run. And those big vessels will cost $80,000 or $100,000 or more per day. So anyway, we wait till the boat's in dry dock, and if you ever have a chance to go to a dry dock, I recommend that because it's where people play with really, really big toys. I mean, this is a 300-foot ferry, and the dry dock just picks it up out of the water. So here I am, feeling like an ant under a tennis shoe. And you get underneath this thing, and you really, really hope that the guys have done a good job of chopping it up, because if those chocks let go, they're going to bury you in a 55-gallon drum. I mean, it's really, there's no getting away. So, the president of Bridgeport and Port Jefferson Steamboat Company is a really nice guy, because we did go to him, and we literally asked him, do you mind if we cut an 18-inch diameter hole in the bottom of your brand new $8 million boat? And he, to his credit, said yes. And when we dedicated the ferry system, we actually had a trophy made up. We actually cut 2 holes. There was one that's like 18 inches in diameter, and I actually had the plate back at the shop. I didn't feel like dragging it here today. It's like 18 inches in diameter hole. But we cut a small hole for water entry. And we took that hole, we took that piece of metal, and we mounted it in a trophy and gave it to it on the occasion of the dedication of the ferry system. So, here we are, mounting the ADCP, which is our acoustic Doppler current profiler. We have a guy in a hard hat suit, goes under the boat, and we're feeding him down cables. And this is, the ADCP is sort of a high-tech sonar that allows us to look under the boat and look at the speed and direction of the water under the boat, even far away from the boat. You actually send acoustic pulses out on 4 different beams, and they reflect off of particles in the water, and they come back with a Doppler shift. That's part of that's related to the speed of the particles in the axis of the beam. And there are 4 beams, and so you get 4 different, for each distance cell, what's called a bin, for each distance range away from the transducer, you get a different Doppler on each of the 4 beams, and you do an awful lot of algebra, and you can figure out the motion of the water at that location. Of course, when the boat's moving too, so you have to subtract the boat's motion. So, but it's doable, and computers are wonderful things. What also was kind of funny is, as we were getting ready to, as this guy was getting ready to go in the water, the boat was in for service, and they were painting above. And I was taking video, and I missed my $10,000 chance, because this guy was standing here in this whole hard hat with the instrument in his hands, and somebody kicked a bucket of paint on the upper rail and buried him in white paint. It took 5 of us an hour to scrub the paint off this guy's stuff. He was not happy. All right, anyway, 15 instruments. We've got the boat instrumented with all kinds of weather equipment, as well as hydrographic equipment that measure temperature and salinity and chlorophyll, and again, the speed of the water. So I'll just run real quick. So this is down in the hold in the void space. This is one of my friends, Bob Stony, emerging from the low rent district. The only way into that void space is through a hatch that is 18 inches in diameter. And this is my personal fitness plan, because it so happens that I am 18 inches in diameter. So if I gain any more weight, I won't be able to go into the void space. If I ate something while I was down there, I'm afraid I'm going to get stuck like Winnie the Pooh trying to get out through a hole. All right. So here are instruments. So we bring the water up, we run it through various instruments. We have weather sensors up on top of the boat. We got stuff all over. We got hundreds of feet of wire running through this boat. It's pretty cool. And then it all comes to a computer. And we have a public data display. Right now, this stuff is down, but we have some funding. We're going to bring it back up. This was actually put in about 10 years ago. Now, we're not the only ship of opportunity. Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines approached the University of Miami, my friends at the University of Miami, my good friends at the University of Miami, my good friends, won't you let me go on this boat at the University of Miami, and said, we're building a new liner. We're calling it Explorer of the Seas, and the theme of the ship is going to be oceanographic exploration. Would you like us to pay for you to put sensors on board this boat? And it's going to be going all over the Eastern, the Caribbean, and the Middle Atlantic. And the guys at the University of Miami said, let me think about this. Sure. So this is an awful picture. We're hoping to get a better one. But they did the same thing to the Explore the Seas that we did with Barnum. And they put equipment, all kinds of equipment, fancier equipment than we could afford, actually, some really high-tech stuff. Our stuff is good, though. On board all over the boat. This was the funny part, though, is they had to have design meetings with the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line interior designers. And they said, what color are your instruments? What style do you have? And we said, style for an oceanographer is duct tape. And then the guy fainted dead away and they had to revive him. They said, no duct tape. So this is the hydrographic instrument lab. And you got to understand, although this is a restricted area, there are these big picture windows because we're part of the display for the passenger. So these big windows into passenger country so they can watch us be oceanographers. Now, what I can tell you is the only real piece of scientific gear is this little salinometer right here. All the rest of this stuff is decoration. These big things you can't really see in the picture, these big domes are fiber optic displays, and they flicker and they do straight. They cost like $30,000 a piece, and they do nothing. My favorite, that you got all this silver and gold and bright yellow. Oh, wait a minute, wake up. What did I do? Oh, there we go. No. Wait a minute. Yeah, there we go. All right. My favorite is, look up here. See that? That's a hatch. Little Captain Nemo round hatch. Goes nowhere, does nothing. No actual opening. Just there for the decorative value. Okay, cruise number 5, Africa. And I have to say Africa with an exclamation point, because I can tell you that I spent 10 days in Africa a couple of years ago. I could spend 2 hours talking about what I saw for every hour I was there. An amazing, unbelievable place. But you said, what is an oceanographer doing in Africa? Well, it so happens, we flew to Amsterdam to Entebbe, Uganda. There's this thing called Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is the second largest freshwater lake in the world. It's the size of it's huge. It's shared by 3 different countries. Water drains into it from another couple of countries, and it supports a huge fishery and has enormous environmental issues. And we were there to work with, to explore collaboration with the universities around the lake and the researchers around the lake who are quite good. And we all brought a certain amount of experience to the table. So we flew into Entebbe Airport, stayed in Kampala, Uganda. Then we drove from Kampala to Jinja, which is where the Uganda National Fisheries Research Center is. Then went from Jinja all the way to Kisumu, Kenya, which is where the Kenyan Freshwater Fisheries Research Lab is. Flew from Kisumu to Nairobi, then flew from Nairobi to Mwanza, Tanzania, where the Tanzanian Freshwater Fisheries Research was. And then from Mwanza flew back to Entebbe and then back to the U.S. All right, and they love their fish in Africa too. As you can see, that's the tilapia, or 8 tilapia on the back of the 200 showing Ugandan coin. And here, this is my big panoramic shot, my big special effects shot. This is Cassia Lodge in Kampala, Uganda, and this is where we stayed. And they advertised the best view in Kampala, and I'm certainly not going to gainsay it. That's Murchison Bay, which is the northern arm of Lake Victoria. And there's 2 nice German tourists having breakfast and watching the same thing I was. All right, here we are. Here's Kamazima Louisa, Professor Kamazima Louisa, Professor of Physical Oceanography at SoMAS, a really nice guy. Josephine Aller, also a professor at SoMAS, also a really nice person. She is a microbiologist. And then Eric Schultz, a graduate, a PhD graduate of SoMAS, a fisheries biologist at the University of Connecticut. And here I am. Behind us is the Nile, the source of the Nile River, a place called something Falls. And I'm blanking on it. It'll come to me. But anyway, these falls right at the outlet of Lake Victoria, the source of the Nile. And it's really funny, wherever there's white water, there are crazy people in kayaks. And there were crazy American and European kayakers running the falls. So here's Kamazima, along with our African guide, Kaniza Mukinya Charles. And he was a very nice guy, helped us drive around. And this is his shop. He does a whole bunch of things in this little market town. And he sells rice and beans and lentils, and actually had more varieties of beans and rice for sale than you get at the local shop right. And here's the market town. So here are some of the research vessels, local research vessels. These happen to be Uganda's research vessels, the ibis and hammerkop. Ibis, of course, you've heard of, but the hammerkop is another bird, Lake Victoria. And here's some shots. Unfortunately, Lake Africa is a place where there's enormous economic inequality, so you see, for every place like that nice hotel I stayed, you see lots of people who live in very often in areas that are essentially shanty towns with no water, no sewer, no electricity. And so you see that pretty much everywhere you go. So here's the back deck of the boat. Does fisheries research. Unlike the Port Jefferson ferry, I would like to say that Africa has advanced in that their hatches are significantly larger and much easier for me to get in and out of. Here's a little laboratory space. The hammerkop is a fairly small vessel, so it has fairly small accommodations. Here are some of the small boats. This down here, if you look, this is water hyacinth, which was introduced to Lake Victoria, and in some cases, and has become a huge problem with invasive plants, and in some cases will cover the shore. In some bad years, has covered 30 or 40% of the lake surface, and even now covers, depending on which way the wind is blowing. I was there one day where the wind would blow away from shore. The shore was clear. The wind blows towards the shore later on in the day, and the hyacinth would be 150 feet to get to the open water. You have to fight your way through with the boat. So here we are going from Kenya, going from Uganda into Kenya. Here we are at the equator. We crossed the equator on the road trip. And this is, you may be able to see, this says this is equator. I actually had a little GPS with me, and I said, you know, we're going to at least know when we cross the equator. We're getting closer, we're getting closer, we're getting closer. I wonder if there'll be a sign. So there was, in fact, this little monument put up by the Lions Club of Kisumu, Kenya. Which you wonder about what the Lions Club could be, something very different there. But anyway, here we are. But like any engineer, I had to check. And it turns out that by my GPS, which is accurate to about 10 meters, anywhere on the planet, you can actually read it right there, you'll see that this is about 100 yards south of the actual physical equator. And I said, how would they do that? Maybe, you know, Uncle George owned a piece of property right there, and that's why they put it in, who would know? But after thinking about it, I think probably this was put up probably 30, 40 years ago before GPS. And within the ability to survey, maybe that was the closest, that was the best survey point that you could get. And now that we have GPS, there's, you know, we know it's a little bit off, but that may have been their best estimate of where the equator actually was. So here we are at Koboko Bay. And we stayed at the Koboko Bay Lodge, which was kind of a cool place. And Kiboko means hippopotamus in Swahili. So I thought to myself, okay, it could be like Fox Run subdivision. You know, it's like it's a tourist place, so of course they're going to say Steamboat Bay. We're sitting eating dinner the first night, and this guy comes up to us, one of the guards, and said, "Would you like to see a hippopotamus?" And we looked at each other and said, "We guess." "Well, there's one eating grass on the back lawn." Okay, so sure enough, everybody in the dining room gets up and we tiptoe around the corner of the building, and sure enough, there's a hippopotamus eating grass on the back lawn. Pink underneath, brown on top, the size of a minivan with a bird stuck on the back end. Now the guy says to me, "Give me your camera." And I'm sitting there staring at the hippopotamus. I'm some significant distance away. I give him the camera, and he starts tiptoeing towards the hippo. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, the flash is going to go off. The hippopotamus is the most dangerous animal in Africa. It kills more people than crocodiles and big cats combined, because they're very territorial, and if you're down at the water and they think you're in their territory, they will just mash you. So I'm thinking to myself, this guy's going to take a picture, the hippo's going to mash him to death. I'm going to have to take care of his family for the rest of my life. And I have 10 more days in Africa and I only have the one camera. So luckily, he got down there, he took a picture, the hippo looks at him and goes, "Oh, tourists," and like goes into the lake. So I guess maybe the two of them have a deal or something. You know, he takes the pictures, later on he brings lettuce, who knows. You know, "I have nice carrots for you today. It's your cut of the profits." So anyway, here we are. Again, this is at the Kaboka Bay Lodge. You can see the water hyacinth up against the... Now this is cool. The next day we actually did get out on the lake, and there are local fishermen, and they use this kind of a boat. I love the name of this boat, the Mama Dorcas Ebenezer from Dunga Beach, Kenya. And the lake is so big that it has a sea breeze. It has a lake breeze. If you've ever been down and seen the sea breeze, you get a lake breeze or sea breeze because land warms up faster than the water in the day, and it cools off faster at night. So these guys get up early in the morning, the land is cool, the lake is warm, there's a breeze that blows offshore, and they take their little sailboat and they sail out a few miles, and they take and they fish. Now, by the afternoon, they're done fishing, but the land is warmed up. Now there's a breeze. Now the land is warmer than the water. They take the breeze back. Solar power. No motor required, no rowing, no problem. So these two guys in the Mama Dorcas Ebenezer are going out to fish. And I will say, one of the great things about travel is that you find out that people are alike all around the world. And guys this age, you know, late teens, early 20s, wherever you go, they're showboaters. You get the showboat. All right, so then we got to see hippopotamus. Those are not rocks in the water. As you can see, they were all paying careful attention to us. And the guy that took us out said he knew what he was doing. I'm glad he knew what he was doing, but I was really, frankly, quite happy to be no closer to the hippos than this. Because when I got back to, I've done a little bit of research on the internet. I'll show you the only pictures I didn't take. This is a picture of a game hunter. This is a picture of a game hunter at Murchison Falls Park in Uganda. And he wasn't paying attention, and this hippo was over here grazing in the grass. And there happened to be somebody a few hundred yards away with a long lens. So the hippo notices him. He notices the hippo. He is a game warden, so he knows exactly what he's in for. And I would say that we should probably recruit him to the Ugandan track team. And he did get away. That's the part that you see. You can laugh at it now. At the time, I'm sure it was quite an exciting experience. But hippos can run 20 miles an hour. Maybe this one was full of grass and wasn't quite as quick as one. So anyway, on to Nairobi, which is a modern city. Just a quick shot. And University of Nairobi is a beautiful place. We went and worked with people. And the obligatory shots, me and went to Africa, I gotta show you a picture of a few critters. This is actually a couple of fun shots. This is a lady we met at the gate of that game park close to Nairobi. She works for the Kenyan Wildlife Service, and you'll notice her Uzi. I will always remember her name is Evely, because I remember it because she's Evely, the heavily armed game warden. And she told me, she was in her early 20s, she was very nice. We talked for a while. She said that she loved her job and she felt it was a great job to have and secure and all. And we finally said, can we take your picture? And she says, it is absolutely forbidden, but go ahead anyway. So that's our picture. And then this was a picture at the park. It's probably hard to read. It says, speed limit 20 miles an hour. Warthogs and children have right of way. So, and then we flew on to Tanzania. This is Mount Kilimanjaro. Out the window of the airplane, and actually quite surprising, one of the few times I've been told that Kilimanjaro is usually completely covered in clouds. And people who had been there, including Kanazema, who'd flown in and out many times, said this is the only time he's ever seen it clearly like that. And then here we are in Mwanza, Tanzania. Remember, they put the tilapia on the money. In Uganda, well, in Tanzania, they built fountains to the wall. Now we're going to go from Kiboka Bay to Tampa Bay, and I'm going to tell you a quick story for the next part. This is the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, built in 1954, that connects Tampa Bay with the mainland, or the port of Tampa with the mainland. And the problem that Port of Tampa is very difficult to get in and out of is about 15 or 20 miles from the open ocean up into the port. And the channel is very narrow and there's nowhere to go. And when you're an ocean-going vessel, you can't stop, you can't slow down, you can't turn around. You commit. And Tampa, there's a reason that sports team is called the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tampa Bay has very violent weather, in fact, the worst lightning on the planet. So the Sunshine Skyway Bridge was built in 1954. On May 9th, 1980, the merchant vessel Some Adventure was blown off course in a storm. The pilot was cleared by the Coast Guard and a Florida grand jury. They said the circumstances were just impossible to control the vessel and impossible to predict what happened. And the main pier survived the strike, but the main pier was reinforced against a ship collision, but nobody ever thought that a ship would be blown so far off course as to hit the secondary pier. The secondary pier collapsed. 1,300 feet of the southbound span collapsed. There were 35 fatalities. It was foggy. Visibility was bad, so people just drove off the edge of the bridge. A man named Wesley McIntyre, the luckiest man in the state of Florida, was the sole survivor of those who fell from the bridge because his truck went off the end of the bridge and landed on the deck of the ship. So here's the new Sunshine Skyway Bridge, built in 1987. You notice the protective dolphins around the main pier and the secondary piers, and in fact, all the way back here where the water's too shallow for a large vessel to go. So there was no way. It was designed, also very attractive, different kind of structure, but it's designed basically to make another accident like Some Adventure impossible. But ships still have to go in and out of the Port of Tampa. So one of the other things that happened is that somebody came up with an idea, the Tampa Bay Physical Oceanographic Real-Time System, called PORTS system, where you have all of these sensors up and down the bay that give you things like water level, current speeds, weather, and that information is all available in real time to ship pilots and help them make the decision as to whether or not it's a good idea to make the run in or make the run out. And port systems have become common around the country and around the world. So, which leads us to cruise number 6. It's not even a research vessel. This happens to be one of our local coastal observatory systems that I run, called LI Shore, lishore.org. Please go to the website for extra credit. And we have instruments around the island. This is actually a rather old map. We did an inventory recently. We have 14 observatory locations around the island right now. Here's Trevor. One of the reasons he went to to Hawaii is that it's just so darn cold in Seaford. So this is him helping put up an instrument in Seaford. Here we are under the Smith Point Bridge, putting in a tide gauge. Here's a weather station up here and Trevor down here. And this weather station is right there because it was hit by lightning, and that'll be one of the things to take a look at later. We have a replacement in place. Oh yeah, here's the picture, but you'll get a chance to see it live. And we also have a buoy, a data buoy we put out in the bay. Here's some of the engineering we did, the internal depths that we built at SoMAS. So we put the thing together, we pick it up, one of our oceanographers, Dr. Charlie Flagg, who running the forklift. We pick it up. This is a nice size for a buoy. It's big enough, it's small enough to pick up with a forklift, put on a lawn trailer to take down to the bay. It's large enough people do pay attention. Well, it's large enough to survive in a rough world. If any of you have ever been on the Great South Bay, you know things can get tough out there. So here we are putting it in the bay, and I have to say it looks really big when you're flying around. It looks a little smaller out in the bay, but there it is. And here's the data on the Great South Bay project, some of the data that we bring in real time from that buoy. This is last summer. We get a phone call from the Suffolk County Police. We think someone ran into your buoy. Now, we didn't know because everything was still working, but we went out to see it, and this is what we found. And, I mean, there's a big ding right here, and there's this. This must have been, you guys got to realize, this thing is 11 feet tall, bright yellow, radar reflector, 2-mile visibility light, and somebody in a great big boat still managed to hit it at high speed. Probably, I can't imagine how intoxicated you would have to be to hit something that hard. Anyway, I was happy because everything worked. Everything was still working. We only lost one sensor, that the physical mount got broken, and it got knocked off in the water. We replaced that, but we put it back together and put it back in the water. Now, I can't leave without a few words about that little high water event we had a few months ago, Superstorm Sandy. We were in, this is an aerial view of Port Jefferson. The Seawolf docks right here in the lee of this area called Mount Misery, which is a couple of 100 feet high. So we have a very steep hill, and we were sheltered. So we never saw winds more than, I think, 15 or 20 miles an hour. Over here at Miller Marine is literally 1,000, 1,500 feet away. They had 90-mile-an-hour gusts. So it's nice to be in a good sheltered spot. But here we are. Here's the Southampton's boat, the Palma, tied up. We brought that around in the North Shore and tied her up. Here is the Seawolf. These are a series of pictures from the Seawolf, which is kind of fun. Normally, the high water in Port Jefferson, several feet below this dock. This is the dock at Harborside Park. So we had people go on board the boat because if things got too bad, we were going to have to cast off and go out to the middle of the harbor and motor around. So and the water rose, and the water rose some more. Now pay attention to this sign because you're going to see it again. And this was the height of the water. You can see the sign is half gone. If you look back here, you'll realize that the water was 2 or 3 feet deep on the pier. And this last picture, it's a little hard to tell, but the floating docks almost came off the pylons, but didn't quite. Here's LaGuardia Airport, seaplane, the temporary seaplane jetway. And then afterwards, just a few pictures that we took along the South Shores. We were putting our equipment back together. This is kind of interesting. If you notice this fence, where I grew up in the hills of West Virginia, you would sometimes be able to tell how high a creek had flooded by looking at how high the trash was caught. Debris and trash were caught in bushes. So here you can see how high the water got here because that line of seagrass caught in the outfield fence and baseball field. This was Blue Water Yacht Club at Merritt. This was the only place where we lost a piece of equipment. And it was because the water was 6 feet deep, and it took all the boats that were in storage and picked them up off of their cradles and threw them around like leaves. This one, I don't even know how they got this off. This thing is balanced on the track for the marine railway. And it came back down. And of course, boats went out of the yard and up the street a couple of blocks. And this guy, sorry for this guy, he had like 6 boats in his front yard. Now, here's Trevor in happier times with the equipment that we had installed in America. It was on the side of the gas dock building. Like, happy. This is the gas dock building afterwards. And what you don't realize is that there was about 12 feet of building here that isn't there anymore, and we were mounted over there. So this is what we had. And we did in fact find, there's our rain gauge, see, there it is upside down there. And way back there is the box. So we did in fact salvage some equipment out of there, and the town of Hempstead is going to pay for us to reoccupy the site as soon as they're finished rebuilding the marina. I ran into this, don't drive around neighborhoods with no power in the dark. I ran into this in the dark. There's a 10 kilovolt line. Luckily, it was a dead 10 kilovolt line, or I would have been toasted. This is Bay Park, which is the site of another one of our locations, and this is the Bay Park sewage treatment plant. So when the flood happened here, the Nassau County Marine Police Bureau is there, and they had 4 feet of, unfortunately, not water in their locations. As you can see pictures like this. This is the guy with the boats. It makes you feel bad. He had to clear out. Of course, anybody who lives in Nassau County has seen plenty of pictures of this in the newspaper, if you're not on your own block. But I am happy to report that after a couple of weeks of possessions and wallboard and stuff, you started seeing outside this guy's house. I saw a nice box for a new washer and a dryer and a refrigerator, so presumably the insurance helped him. And this, as an amateur musician, I had to stop. Not the most damage I saw, but you have to stop and have a moment of silence for a musical instrument. That is no more. And here is a picture I took in Point Lookout of, these are all trucks from Pacific Gas and Electric that were literally flown across the country on military C-130 transports. They drove them on in California and flew them across the country with their crews to come in and help with the recovery effort. And if you need logs for your fireplace, you go to Seaford, Siemens Neck Park in Seaford. And I'd never seen these trucks before. They were kind of cool for cleaning up stuff. And here we are repairing the tie gauge at Seaford. Greg Smith, one of my students now, helping. And we, in fact, took the opportunity. We had so much trouble with shore power going out and staying out that we converted our equipment to solar, and we're putting solar power in all our new stations. And here's your free band name. These are monk parakeets that are feral, that live in Siemens Neck Park. They supposedly escaped from a cargo container at Kennedy Airport about 30 years ago and have established themselves in certain colonies. They like to breed in tall, isolated, they breed in large colonies in tall, isolated trees in their native environment. So they take over the tops of light towers, like the lights around this baseball field. So there are several big colonies of monk parakeets that live in the light towers around the baseball field. And so these are the Seaford feral parakeets back at work. And if anybody, I can't think of a better band name than the feral parakeets. You can think about that if you have musical ambitions. So quickly talk about my exhibits down here. You can come down and look at. We have the pressure crust cup we talked about, the glass sphere. Here's our weather station that was struck by lightning. You can take a good look at it. I typically take that out to middle school exhibits and tell people to take a good look at it. And then the next time that your soccer coach tells you to get off the field because there's lightning, remember this. We have a piping plover, a model of a piping plover. as well as some pictures of piping plovers at the Old Inlet Breach in along the South Shore, and a baby plover chick. We've got 3 kinds of sand. This is pink sand from Bermuda. It's biogenous in that it's made from crushed coral, and it's pink. You can actually compare it with, this is, I guess, plain old sand, you can call it, from Rocky Point. And then this is black sand from Rocky Point, where sand falls off of the bluffs, and it lands at the bottom, and the light stuff gets blown away, and what's left is magnetite and garnet. And it's much heavier than the plain quartz sand. You can feel the difference. And you can actually use a magnet, and you can pick the magnetite out of it and see it. And you can actually use this, a magnet on this sand, and if you roll it along, eventually you'll get enough magnetite. You'll see there's a few grains of magnetite. So it gives you an idea of how much the wind has concentrated. If this is what comes out of the bluff, this, you can imagine the thousands of times concentration that the wind concentrates these. And in fact, Thomas Edison, there were deposits of black magnetite sand on Long Island along the South Shore in such quantity that Thomas Edison attempted to build an iron refinery in Quogue, but shortly before it was completed, there was a huge storm and the sand was all blown away and never came back. Manganese nodules. These are very cool. These are deposits of minerals that accrete in the deep ocean. These mineral samples are all from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, was kind enough to lend them to us. This was collected at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. These things are so new, I don't even have signs for them yet. This was collected on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge at a depth of 2,850 fathoms times 6 feet, so it's over 12,000 feet, a couple of miles deep, in 1978. And these manganese nodules are rich in manganese and other minerals, and it's kind of interesting that they were the cover story for a Cold War, one of the most secretive Cold War operations ever, called Project Azorian. I got my notes. I'm still learning this story. Yes, Project Azorian, or Operation Azorian, was an operation of the CIA where they enlisted Howard Hughes, and Hughes Marine, to build a ship which was called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. And the stated purpose of the Glomar Explorer was to prospect for manganese nodule deposits in the Pacific Ocean. The true purpose, and this is in 1974, the true purpose was to recover a sunken Soviet submarine, the K-129, that had sunk south of Hawaii. And after the Soviets gave up looking for it, the CIA had a secret survey, and they located it, and they got Howard Hughes to build this ship, and the total cost of the project was $800 million at the time, which would be about $3.7 billion today, with the idea of raising the submarine and recovering nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles that were on the submarine, and they actually had hoped to get paper documents, code books, all kinds of, it would have been intelligence treasure trove. So they went out there, the cover story that they were looking for manganese nodules. They pulled this thing up. Supposedly it broke in half, and they only recovered a small section of the submarine, along with the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors. And they did give the 6 sailors that they recovered a burial at sea, formal, full military honors, sewn into the Soviet flag, buried at sea, everyone in full dress uniform. And they videotaped it, and after the end of the Cold War, they actually delivered that videotape to the Russian government. Supposedly it was not particularly successful. There is a conspiracy theory that says they got the whole submarine in the cover story because it was broke. The story got broken in 1975. What the real purpose of the Glomar, the Global Explorer was. Supposedly, there's a conspiracy theory that they got the whole submarine. Who knows? Manganese nodules. So, pillow basalt. This is another, this is 3,000 meters, so this is about 9,000 feet in the Indian Ocean, picked up as a dredge sample. Pillow basalt is what you get when you have a volcano erupt in the deep sea underwater. The lava comes out, and of course the lava is very hot. The water is very cold, the pressure is very high. The pressure is so high that the water can't boil. And so you actually get, if you look at this, you come down later and look at it, you'll see that the basalt, there's sort of a normal kind of rock here that our geologists would recognize as basalt in the middle, but on the surface there's this funny peckly pattern, and it's glass because the lava cools very, very quickly, and on the outside it's volcanic glass. So this is a rock from 9,000 to almost 2 miles deep in the ocean. These two were recovered by dredges. Now, these are the coolest things that I have at this point. This is, you all have seen, probably Discovery Channel, black smokers and white smokers hydrothermal vents. This is a piece of a white smoker recovered by the deep submersible Alvin in 1981 on the East Pacific Rise, Pacific Ocean. And if you look, you'll see the smokers, you see these vents come up out of the ocean, water circulates down, is heated by geologic heat, and comes back up, superheated and loaded with minerals, and it comes out and it precipitates and it builds these big, sort of almost reverse icicles. So a white smoker has low amounts of sulfur in it, and of course you all have seen that these things support a whole community on the bottom that's not dependent on sunlight. So if you look at this, you'll see there are beautiful crystals as this thing grows. The minerals precipitate out in crystals. I would just ask you maybe not to pick this one up because some of the crystals are incredibly delicate and fine. And then if you've got lots of sulfate, you get a black smoker. Black smokers grow even faster. I've been told they grow meters a year. And this is a piece of a black smoker, and you can see it's very pretty and glistening, and you'll even see there's gold in it. It's iron pyrite, fool's gold. So you see gold color. And if you smell it, you can smell the sulfur as this thing is slowly, ever so slowly, is degrading in the oxygen atmosphere. So you can smell it. Now, so from all of us on the ocean, as I told you, I do love my job, and I think it's an important job. Studying the oceans is an important job. It affects everyone on the planet, whether or not you happen to be within sight of the ocean. It's a challenging job. There's a lot left to find. Black smokers, white smokers, hydrothermal vents. I can tell you that when I started my career 34, 35 years ago, the theory of continental drift was just being proposed. So there are yet more things to do. There's plenty more to do in the ocean. There's plenty more to discover in the ocean, and it's really important to the stewardship of our planet. And you get to have fun with guys like this. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention. He would like to thank you as well. And yes, the last piece, entice you to come down here. We'll have some questions, and then you all come down and look at stuff. This is not just half of a benthic benthos glass sphere. It is the most expensive candy dish at Stony Brook University. So, thank you very much, and I'll take any questions you have.